Welcome back to my learning game of World War I, 1914 through 1918. I will be writing down any mistakes that I've noticed in the description boxes below each video. The one that I've noticed so far is that after rereading the section on Russian and Romanian units in combat, it seems that they suffer double losses when attacking as well. When attacking German units, including unoccupied fortifications. So I made adjustments to the crypts to reflect that they did not attack this fortification. Instead, they used their remaining crypts to attack the Austro-Hungarians once more in the south during their third attack phase. So now we're entering turn 2, the winter of 1914. And finally, we get to resolve movement, starting with the Allies. Here's a situation in the Western Front. I'm using these blue cylinders from Through the Ages to show which unoccupied Allied resource centers are currently under German control, including the one they start the game with across the French border, as well as the one in Brussels. Now it's time to move French armies up to fill in the gap, reinforce their left flank, and hold tight with their 20 crypts. The Belgian and the British armies each have 4. So let's go ahead and do this on camera with my left hand because the tripod's in the way. This is going to be shaky. 1, 2. Now the enemy zones of control are suppressive only for purposes of supply tracing and retreat paths, not in terms of regular movement. 1, 2. 1, 2. Now we'll move our newly built Russian armies, keeping the first Russian army here so that the German 8th can't slip past us this way. 2 and 3 strength fortifications do exert a zone of control, but 1 strength fortifications do not. Let's go ahead and move the 6th, and we'll use rail movement and a 1 and a 2 to this hex. Then we'll move the Russian 7th also along the rail. 1, 2, 3 to the fortification in Warsaw. And both Serbian armies remain where they are and play passes to the Central Powers for their movement phase. And we'll start by taking a look down here in Turkey, which we know is no longer neutral and is a pro-Central Powers ally. Looking at the Allied sea movement rules, we know that if Central Powers unit occupies this hex, the Dardanelles hex, then Allied sea movement is prohibited to any Turkish coastal hex, and until the fortification in Constantinople is destroyed, they may not access any of the Black Sea coastal hexes using sea movement. So let's go ahead and move this second Turkish army along the coast to occupy that hex. 2 of the hex sides are blocked, so they may not be involved in combat from that hex, between that hex and Bulgaria. But this would tempt the Allied players, should they decide to use sea movement on the next or future turns, to have to land first in one of these other neutral countries, thereby granting us 5 points and the corresponding armies. So let's go ahead and move this 1, 2. This other army occupies a supply source. I think it's in a fairly good position as is. Now back to the Western Front for German movement. We'll start by moving the 3rd German Army through Antwerp, across the French border to help out the situation here for the 2nd German Army and their possible attack against the British, who are defending with 6. So we'll take a couple of resource centers along the way and can ignore the Dutch Army's zone of control, as the Netherlands are still a neutral country. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, my plan is to also move units up to take these two hexes in control of yet another resource center, mainly because all the resource centers and therefore victory points are clustered around this area. There's really nothing down here of value, but at the same time we want to make sure that French units can't sneak past us or break through, of course. So let's see what we can do. We'll grab both the 5th and 6th armies to do this. The 5th army can move 1, 2, 3, 4 to this hex. And the German 6th will use rail movement to reach this hex. And a 1, 2, 3, 4. This does leave quite a few hexes unoccupied here in the south. However, fortifications are considered units. They have a defensive strength. 2 and 3 strength units exert a zone of control. I do worry a bit about this 1 strength fortification against the army of the Alsace, but even if they manage to destroy it, which will be difficult, we still have, quite a few crypts and almost as many, 1 less than the French. I probably should have maybe saved some more so we could maintain superiority in the combat phases for this turn. But anyway, what's done is done. The 2 strength fortification of Strasbourg would prevent it from sneaking past us. This does leave the German resource center unoccupied, but it's not a unit, cannot be attacked if it's unoccupied. And the Metz fortification hex has a defensive strength of 3. It's rough terrain, which is +1. I think that we will manage to withstand any French attacks in this on the left flank. Also, enemy zones of control are suppressive only for purposes of supply tracing and retreat paths, but not for movement. Now to the Eastern Front. I see an opportunity for the Germans and Austro-Hungarians to work together against the Russians, specifically against the 4th and 7th Russian armies. We'll start by bringing the 9th German army from Berlin down by rail into Russia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can bring this other 10th German army from Leipzig towards Warsaw. Let's see. And then we bring another unit either from Vienna or Budapest over there as well. The Austro-Hungarian units may pass through Germany, they just can't end their movement phase in Germany. We'll go ahead and move the 10th German army first out of Leipzig. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll just go ahead and move this unit from Vienna. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's see. I'll move this first Austro-Hungarian unit into the 2 strength fortification. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have this unit in Budapest. Let's see what we can do with it, as well as this unit over here. We can help out either against the 2 Russian units that have invaded, or start heading over towards Italy. We know that Italy is arriving on turn 3. We'll go ahead and bring the unit from Budapest into Russia as well to help out on the attack against the 7th Russian army in Warsaw via rail. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this the 2nd Austro-Hungarian army will help the 3rd defend against the invading Russians. and we're going to split up here 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that ends the Central Powers movement phase, entering the superior player determination phase. The Allies actually get to go first. They have 6 more crypts than the Central Powers, and I probably screwed up there and should have paid more attention to the totals instead of building so many new armies. On the other hand, I'm pretty happy with what we have as the Central Powers with our deployment in the Eastern Front. And we're just going to go with the flow, see what happens. I think this is where I'll shut the camera off and report back at the end of all the combat phases, as most of the action takes place on the crypt track above anyway. And I may update if something interesting happens on the board, if a country runs out of crypts and is forced to start retreating or suffering losses, destroying units. And I think you can tell from watching me resolve movement rather clumsily where our potential attacks will be. When defending during a winter game turn, the total defense strength is increased by 2. By the way, you may have noticed that I made a mistake in leaving the 4th Russian army there in its starting hex. I didn't see this pinning maneuver coming, and now it's unsupplied, which means its defensive strength is halved and rounded up to a 2 from a 3. We still get the +1 for the rough, +2 for winter, bringing it to a total of 5 against the Central Powers' potential 6. A roll on the 1, not too bad, but losses are doubled. And we can still spend crypts. The Russians have the most at the moment, 25 after my adjustments after I posted turn 1. But should it be eliminated, it's gone for good, cannot be rebuilt. We remove it from the game and we can use it to mark destroyed fortifications, etc. Here we are after the first superior attack phase. The Allies focused their efforts in the Western Front. There were really no other good options on the board, and we chose to target 3 units, the 5th, 1st, and 7th German armies in an effort to deplete German crypts. Higher rolls on average, however, meant that we were forced to spend more of our own to absorb losses. The French crypts went down from 20 to 12. The Germans went down from 18 to 15. We've just finished the first inferior player attack phase. Again, nothing's changed on the map, just on the crypt track above. And overall, an incredibly successful turn for the Central Powers. We rolled a 1 3 out of 4 times. We first attacked the British BEF unit with the German 2nd, 3rd, and 5th armies. We rolled a 1, forcing the British to expend crypts to absorb losses, bringing them from 4 crypts down to 1. During the first 2 attack phases, players are supposed to spend crypts or retreat hexes to absorb losses if they are able to do so. It's during the 3rd attack phases where when you can choose to voluntarily have your armies destroyed. So we're hoping that during the 2nd inferior attack phase, the Germans will attack again, and this time force the British to retreat, bringing us ever closer to those very valuable resource centers. Then we attacked along the northern half of the Eastern Front. We targeted the 7th Russian Army defending the fortification hex of Warsaw, along with the unsupplied 4th Russian Army in the rough, and then finally re-rolled for an attack across the border against this 1-strength fortification in the clear. Our first 2 attacks were both a die roll result of 1. Since we were attacking in concert with Austro-Hungarians, we were able to apply those single losses to their crypts, and of course the Russians suffered double losses. It was devastating. They were at 25 crypts the end of the turn with 13. We rolled a 5 over here, and that brought the German crypts down a bit. They're now at 11. After the 2nd superior attack phase, the Germans and French are both left with 7 crypts each. The French took advantage of their lead here to conduct 2 separate attacks, one against the 1st German army, another against the 7th, in an effort to, again, force the Germans to expend Krips to absorb losses. And it seems that the Germans would like to build more new armies than the French in general, as they're dealing with multiple fronts here. So we'd also like to make it less enticing for them to attack the British here on the next attack phase. Of course, we can't prevent the Germans from building new armies. That happens after the Kripp allocation phase, but at least we can make it so they perhaps build fewer. And here we are after the second inferior attack phase, which was a very interesting one. The closer the Kripp markers get to 0, the more tense and exciting I think the combat is, even though very little, if anything, changes on the map itself. So it was a hard decision what to do with the Germans in the Western Front. We decided to play it safe, relatively safe. It was still risky because rolling a 6 on the 0 is a 4/0. We had an option of rolling on the 0 or on the 4 against the British BEF, but we really wanted to at least do one attack at one of those differential columns to take advantage of the fact that they were sitting at a 1, and on the next turn the British get 15 back. So we decided to go with the 0 column, and we rolled a 2/1 result, and so that brought British Krips down to 0, and the Germans did have to go down 2 as well. They're now at 5. It's still pretty dangerous because depending on what the French decide to do, depending on what they can do, they might be able to, on the third superior attack phase, which comes next, start forcing the Germans to retreat hexes should their Krips drop to 0. But the French do still have quite a lot of losses they'll need to inflict upon the Germans for that to happen, and in one attack phase it may be unlikely. And then to play it safe in the Eastern Front, we decided to just go with the 2 attacks against the Russian armies and leave that unoccupied fortification alone. Let me pan over here. So the Central Powers decided to attack the 4th and 7th Russian armies again. The 4th is in rough terrain but unsupplied, and the 7th is in a 1-strength fortification hex. And we decided to forego the attack against the border, which is probably not a really wise target anyway to begin with, in order to avoid having to expend any German Krips in these attacks. All losses for the attacker were applied to the Austro-Hungarian Krips, still relatively high at a 15. The Russians suffered quite a lot again, double losses, dropping their Krips all the way down to 5. Let's go ahead and resolve the third set of attack phases on camera now that we expect to see some changes on the board, units retreating, maybe others being destroyed or even permanently eliminated if they're unlucky and are unsupplied or out of Krips and have no retreat path. We're starting with the Allied player. The French are at 7 Krips, the Russians and Germans at 5, the British at 0, Austro-Hungarians at 15. We're ignoring Belgian and Turkish Krips right now because nothing's happening down in Turkey, and the Belgians, because of the weather and the situation up here, are prevented from being able to attack or be attacked. All defending units get a +2 to their defensive strength on winter turns, which is every other turn. The French are again going to take advantage of the fact that they have more Krips than the Germans. Just a little bit more, but maybe enough to do this. Drive German Krips even further down to make it less enticing for them to attack the British, whom are at 0 Krips and therefore required to either be destroyed or retreat hexes. It's the third set of attack phases, so players may opt to voluntarily have their units destroyed when defending instead of expending Krips or retreating hexes. So this is especially so if you're forced to retreat multiple hexes, for example, and just don't have enough Krips. So we're also thinking that the order of your attacks and the choice of target hexes is more important now than before, now that everyone's running so low on crypts. They may be more likely to retreat hexes than expend crypts, depending on the positional advantage of the hex or the value of the hex in terms of victory points. I'm looking at the first German army, for example, or let's see, basically hexes that are not resource centers that would also, even when vacant, still prevent your opponent from breaking through. Remember, direct movement from enemy zone of control to another is prohibited. Our first attack will be against the 5th German Army. They occupy a resource center hex, so they're less likely to retreat, but we will be rolling on the 0. So here's the table, and we roll a 3, which is a 2/2. Not bad. The Germans will spend 2, and the French will spend 2 as well. Okay, so the Germans have 3 crypts, the French are down to 5. Taking a look again at the combat results table, knowing that we'd like to drop the German crypts down to 1, maybe a 0 if possible, which means inflicting 2 or 3 losses at least. That means we would probably like to go for a differential of 3 or higher, but maybe cap it off at 6, just in case we roll a 6 and are forced to destroy an attacking unit. So 3 through 6, looking at the board again, that means either the 1st and or the 7th German armies as targets. The 1st German army seems to be more of a threat because it's closer to Paris. The 7th German army is kind of alone down there. We would be rolling on the 3 down here, attacking with the 3 adjacent units, and against the 1st we would be attacking with the 4th, 1st, and 3rd armies. The 5th has already been involved in combat this turn, so that would be on the 4. Looking again at the table, of course, a 4 is more likely to inflict those 2 losses, and a roll of a 6 is just as bad on either. So let's go for the attack against the 1st German army. Rolling on the 4, we get a 3, which is a 3/2. Luckily not a 6. 3/2. 3 losses on the attacker, 2 on the defender. How would Germany like to apply these losses? They could either retreat 2 hexes, or spend 2 crypts, bringing them to 1, or retreat a hex and spend a crypt. Looking again at the table and knowing that as the Germans we'd like to attack the British on the 0, we should be prepared to spend 2. So we're going to spend a crypt and retreat a hex. Now, I hope I didn't screw this up in the last video. I think it's too late to correct it, but I'm reading here for displacement. Units in enemy zones of control may not be displaced. So we would have to retreat 2 hexes to avoid that. If we retreat 1 hex, we would be displacing the 4th or the 6th, both of which are in enemy zones of control. So we would have to spend 2 crypts or retreat 2 hexes. Let's bring this back and go ahead and retreat 2 hexes. Friendly units suppress enemy zones of control when it comes to retreating. Ever closer to an enemy, ever closer to a supply source city while avoiding enemy zones of control. 1, 2. or avoiding vacant enemy zones of control, I should say. So that was a 2-hex retreat. The French may advance. And we move the first French army up to occupy the hex. We must also spend 3 crypts. 1, 2, 3. So the French are at 2, the Germans still have 3. That didn't quite work out. Looking again at the combat results table, a roll on the 3 is dangerous. It's a 50-50 chance that attacking units would be destroyed at this point. Probably should have gone for the 7th first. And I don't see any other options. Should we go for it? It's a 50-50 chance. It's unlike me to go for something like that. This British unit is defending a clear hex. On the 0, the worst they can do is 2 losses on the defender, a 2-hex retreat. 1, 2, and then we'd have a German unit in that hex. It's a tough choice. I'd like to phone a friend. Alright, that's not even an option because even if we inflict 2 losses, the Germans can just spend a crypt and retreat to Strasbourg and they'll still be okay, and we may not with 3 losses. So the Germans are still at 3 crypts, but the French are down to 2, so now both the British and French units are looking like good targets. The French will take a little bit more effort to force retreat. None of these Allied units are occupying anything of value except for the Belgians, whom are not an option. Instead of rushing for an attack against the army of the Lorraine, we're going to focus on our attention with the British and finish what we started. We can roll on the 0 or we can roll on the 4. And looking at the table and knowing that we have 3 crypts remaining, I think we should go for the 4. And most likely inflict 2 losses. They would have to either retreat 2 hexes in that case or be destroyed. So let's see what we get. We're in trouble if we roll a 6. Oh, we roll a 3. It's a 3/2. 2. They can either be destroyed or retreat 2 hexes to Paris. I think they will... It's a tough call. I mean, they get 15 crypts on the next turn. They can hold their ground in Paris for a while with that. As much as I hate to do this, I think we need to destroy the British unit because the Belgians, well, they're pretty weak and they have 4 crypts, but that's all. They get no more over the course of the game. So we'll take this away. And it was in supply, so hopefully we can rebuild it here on the next turn. The German Third Army advances, and that was a 3 on the 4, so 3 crypts. 1, 2, 3 are spent by the Germans, bringing them to 0. Let's see what else we can do. Our Central Powers allies, the Austro-Hungarians, will be conducting 2 attacks alongside the Germans against the Russians in the Eastern Front, targeting the 4th and 7th Russian armies again. The Russian losses would be doubled in both cases, and against the Russian 4th Army, which is unsupplied, we would be rolling on the 1, as their defensive strength is halved and rounded up to a 2, +1 for the rough terrain and +2 for winter. We're attacking with 4 +2. And then against the Russian 7th, we have an option of rolling on the 0 or on the 4. I'm sorry, 0 or 2. They're defending with 3 and a 1 strength fortification in clear terrain. And we want to involve at least one Austro-Hungarian unit so that we can apply losses to them. They're at 15 currently on the crypt track. The Russians are all the way down at 5. So the question is, do we want to attack the 4th Army first? And second question is, do we want to roll on the 0 or the 2 when attacking the 7th? We're going to start over here, hoping to force the 7th to be destroyed or retreat, and our second attack will go with 2 column here, 1 here. I'm sorry, yes, 1 here. So rolling on the 1. Ooh, we roll a 5, that's 3/1, which becomes 3/2. Now this is interesting. With the result of 2, the Russians have a choice. Do they want to spend 2 crypts to preserve the 4th Army, or do they want to destroy it and keep all 5 crypts? I believe that's how it works. Yeah, so the Austro-Hungarians definitely will spend 3. Looking at the 2 column, it's hard to say. Let's go ahead and spend crypts. Russians spend 2. They were lucky that the Central Powers rolled so high. Austro-Hungary goes down by 3. And we'll make our second attack. Yeah, okay. Rolling on the 2. They roll a 4, 3/1. Oh wow. The Russians locked out. It's a 3/2. They have enough crypts to hold their position. 1, 2. And Austria-Hungary spends another 3, bringing them to 9. The British get 15. The French 20. The Russians 40. Germany 40. Austria-Hungary 25. And Turkey 6, but they max out at 6. Go ahead and place one of these here. And now the Allies may build new armies. Alright, so we've built our new armies. The Russians built 2 armies along the rail line. The British rebuilt their expeditionary force. The Germans built 2 armies again as well, one in Berlin, one in Leipzig, and since the Italians are entering on turn 3, the Austro-Hungarians built a new army and placed it in the 2 strength fortification, also a supply source in rough terrain along the Italian border. By the way, there's a misprint on the board, and this hex down here is inaccessible from Italy. And I think that's it. So let's go ahead and get started with turn 3, the summer of 1915. It's Allied movement, and I want to shuffle units around here. So I'll bring the Belgian army over here, so it's facing only 1 enemy unit and not on a resource center. 1, 2. We will bring the stronger British Expeditionary Force up here. 1. And the 4th French army up and around. 1, 2, 3, 4. To defend the resource center along the coast. Over in Italy we have kind of overlapping zones of control. Not much we can do. I'll bring the 1st Italian army over into rough terrain. 1, 2, 3. Leaving the 2nd army where it is so that the 4th will have a retreat path to Venice should the time come. Not quite yet, as the Austro-Hungarians don't have quite the attack strength to do anything there. I'm not quite sure what to do about this situation. I don't think much is going to happen, at least not until turn 4 when the Bulgarians join the Central Powers. I know that these units would not be able to trace supply to the Russian supply source eastern map edge quite yet, as the supply line may not trace through neutral countries. So we'll just keep them where they are and move on to the Russian units. Okay, so over here we definitely want to try to bring supply back to the 4th Russian army. The newly built Russian armies can't quite reach that location, so we'll bring the 7th Army out of Warsaw there instead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we want to place a unit in Warsaw to replace the 7th. We'll do that by bringing the 10th down the rail hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're left with the 9th. And we, with the 9th, would like to focus on attacking Austro-Hungarian units, of course. So we could go here, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or we can, where else can we go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's our only option for an attack in this turn. Unfortunately, the 2 Austro-Hungarian units here have split up and are making it impossible for us to do anything there for now. Of course, we can move these units as well. Let me think. 4th can trace supply through 7th and then into this hex. So we could bring the 5th here. 1, 2, 3, 4, so at least get an attack on the 3rd Austro-Hungarian army. And then bring this guy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Central Powers movement phase. I hope I didn't accidentally delete previous clips. Okay, so what to do with the German First Army? We can bring it down to occupy this resource center. We can take a combination of normal land and rail movement to Metz. Or we can just leave the Western Front, do something else, maybe bring it down to Italy, now that the Allied player can utilize this convenient Franco-Italian transit area. But judging by the situation up here, I don't think they're going to be moving units out of France quite yet. They haven't built any new armies. We'll see what happens. Let's go ahead and do the second option. 1, 2, 3. Now you can do a combination of normal land and rail movement as long as you don't do 2 separate rail movement segments. So as long as you don't sandwich normal land movement between 2 rail movements. Over here we'd like to bring these newly built German armies to this area. And start pushing towards Vilna. So how do we do that? 1, 2. 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's the superior player determination phase, and again, it's the Allies. I feel like I'm playing it wrong by having the Allies get superiority 2 turns in a row or at all in the beginning, but that's how it works out. So at least we have more armies on the board as Central Powers. You know, this is a learning game, so we'll learn from our mistakes, which are pretty obvious after the fact. In the Western Front, the French Fourth Army and the British Expeditionary Force joined in an attack against the Second German Army here in clear terrain. We rolled on the 2 and suffered 3 losses, inflicting 2. The Russians in the Eastern Front made 2 attacks, one against the 3rd and one against the 1st Austro-Hungarian armies. We got a 3/2 result here, and for this attack we rolled a 6. Awful result. That was a 4/0. Luckily, against only Austro-Hungarian units, losses are not doubled, so that drops Russian Crips down to 24. Over by Italy, we attacked the 11th Austro-Hungarian army, defending in a 2-strength fortification in the Rough, also a dependent supply city. We attacked with the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Italian armies and got a 2/2 result. Now we're entering the first inferior attack phase. We're going to focus with our Germans in the Eastern Front, but once German Crips goes down low enough, the French might become more active during their attack phases in the Western Front. I can't remember why I didn't move the 4th Austrian Army into this hex, but oh well. So we'll be attacking the 4th, the 10th, the 1st, and possibly one or the other of these 2 hexes. We have movement, we have a change on the board, and it's only just the first attack phases. Basically, it was an interesting attack phase for the Central Powers here in the Eastern Front. For our first attack against the 4th, we got a modified 1/4 result. The Russians decided to apply the losses and retreat hexes. You can do that up to 5 hexes. And so we brought the unit through this friendly occupied hex towards Brest-Litovsk. The German army advanced. But up here, we rolled a 6 as the Central Powers, which was on the, what was it, 3 + 1 on the 4? Yeah, it was a 5/1, which became a 5/2. We applied the losses to the Austro-Hungarian units. I believe you can apply it to, in any combination, to the Germans and Austro-Hungarians. We chose to go all Austro-Hungary. They're still at 17. The Germans are still up at 25. The Russians ended the turn at 18 after our final combat here, which was, I think, a 3/2. In this case, we decided to hold our ground. In the Western Front, the Germans are focusing on this British unit. We got a 3/2 result, dropping the British Crips down to 5. The Germans are now tied with the French at 22. Back to the Allies for their second attack phase, very successful here in the Western Front. We started out by attacking the 2nd German Army again with the French and British units here, and we rolled a 1. That gave the French some momentum to continue attacking along the line here, and we made 2 more attacks, one against the 3rd and one against the 4th, rolling on the 0 and the 1 respectively, and rolled fairly well and ended up at 7 Crips for the French, 16 for the Germans. The British dropped to 4. We decided to apply losses in this combined attack with the Belgians to the French Crips. It's just so that the Belgians can stick around for a while longer and absorb those losses should the 3rd German army decide to go for that hex. The hex occupied by the British is more appealing, though, as it's a resource center. Not good for the Italians. They attacked again and rolled a 6. That was a 5/1. They're down to 8 crypts. The Austro-Hungarians are now tied with the Germans at 16. Back to the Eastern Front as the Central Powers. At the end of their second attack phase, we started by attacking the 7th Russian Army, which was in this hex, with all 3 adjacent units. We inflicted 4 losses on the defender. They retreated a hex and spent 3 crypts. We advanced the 9th Army into that hex. Then we attacked the 10th Russian Army defending Warsaw, 1 strength fortification in clear terrain. We rolled a 6, however, which was awful, 5/1, which became a 5/2. 2 was low enough that the Russians were comfortable spending those crypts and holding their ground. We applied the 5 losses to the Austro-Hungarian crypts. They are now down at 8, tied with the Italians. The Russians are at 13. The Germans ended with 16, the French with 17. We decided to pass on the attack here since we have fewer crypts than the French, although only by 1. We decided to only make 1 attack, playing very conservatively again. The British and French attacked the 2nd German Army, rolling on the 2. We roll a 3, that's a 3/2 result. 3 losses on the attacker. We're going to split the losses up. Well, let's first apply to Germany. They go down by 2 to 14, and we'll spend 1 British crypt and 2 French crypts. The French now have 15 crypts, the Germans 14. We could change our mind to make another attack, but we like having more crypts than the Germans, and we want to build more units at the end of the turn. Also, having more crypts than Germans means that the Germans have to decide whether it's worth increasing that spread in order to inflict those double losses on the Russians. Back to the Central Powers for the last attack phase of the turn, and a couple of thoughts before we begin in the Eastern Front. I'm thinking that it's actually, at least in this situation, advantageous to end as the inferior player with the final attack phase, because we get to just spend all our remaining crypts without any fear of retaliation while in a very vulnerable state, very low on the crypt track. Secondly, I think that I'm probably approaching the game in completely the wrong way. I think I did the same thing in the last playthrough. I tend to do that always during learning games, and in this case I think I might be a little bit too fearful of attacking, or too fearful of my armies being destroyed while attacking. I've been absorbing all losses as the attacker by expending crypts. Maybe, depending on the situation, what I need to be doing is attacking and destroying my units. It feels counterintuitive. Hopefully I'm wrong, but the fact that you do crypt allocation before you build new armies is another hint that maybe that's the way to go. I'll have to try that out, that new approach, in a different game off camera sometime, but I'm going to continue the way I've been playing and see how it goes. More changes on the board. We attack the 1st Russian Army rolling a 1, and that's 8 losses to the defender. The unit's destroyed. The 8th Army advances a hex. Then we attack the Russian 10th and 7th armies as well. The Russians end with 3 crypts, the Germans at 7. The Austro-Hungarians at 8. Still, we decided to apply the losses to the Germans since they had so many more crypts, and receive more at the end of the turn than the Austro-Hungarians. The French are still at 15. We're debating whether we should go for another attack here or focus on the western front as we end our attack phase. I think we're going to work on trying to force the French to spend some more of their crypts. And so the Germans end the turn with 0 crypts. We attack the French 4th, 5th, and 3rd armies, bringing French crypts down to 10 now. And we ignored the Belgians again. Well, we had no choice last turn, but this turn, mainly because they have 4 crypts, they're not going to get any more from the schedule, only from borrowing from other countries. And we see that the Germans will continue to receive quite a bit more than the French or the Russians. We want to keep those two in check. They're still ahead of us here, but we'll see where that takes us. The British have 4, as do the Russians. Turks still at 6. Nothing happened down there. Italians and Austro-Hungarians both at 8. Now, the Italians, you may have noticed, did not attack in the 3rd attack phase. Instead, I think we're thinking that we want to spend those crypts to build more armies. We'll see. And then the Bulgarians will enter with 0 crypts here in the next turn. The winter of 1915 through 1916. Alright, crypt allocations. 15 for the British. They're now at 18. 20 for the French, bringing them to 30. That's the highest they've seen, I think, so far. 40 for the Russians brings them to 43. Well, next turn they're getting 25. The Germans get 40 as well. And 15 for the Italians. I almost skipped them. They're at 8. What is that? 15, 23. And 25 for the Austro-Hungarians are at 8. 25, 33. And Turkey's at 6 still. And here we are at the end of the turn. The British built a unit in Love. The Russians rebuilt their first army, and the Austro-Hungarians built a unit in Budapest. The Germans built one in Berlin.